Hi, everybody. Welcome to In the Work, Makers and Shakers. I'm Dan Rubenstein, Home and Design Director for Departures Magazine, and I'd like to introduce to you Lacy Schutz, the Executive Director of the Shaker Museum, and Brooklyn-based designer Katie Stout. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today for this amazing talk, and I'm really excited to be here, and thank you to Design Miami. Lacy, why don't we start with you? How do you, when you meet someone for the first time and they just don't know the Shaker Museum, or they may have a vague notion of who the Shakers were, how do you describe the institution and what it is and what you do?
Yeah, I think people often know one or two things about Shakers, and they tend to know that they made things like chairs. They're familiar with the oval boxes. They often know that the Shakers were celibate, and that's sort of a point of interest for some people. But a lot of people don't know much beyond that. And I like to tell people that they were radical progressives, that they held radically progressive values in regards to things like gender and race and ability and community way back at the end of the 1700s in the United States. And that it's a pretty remarkable story.
And Katie, what is your first memory of learning about the Shakers, or what has your sort of journey been like in terms of understanding them?
I feel like my journey with Shaker design is I feel like I was introduced to it through chairs, like a lot of people. I grew up with, my mom had Shaker chairs around her dining room table. And yeah, so I feel like I was introduced to it through this lens of the chairs, the cabinets and the drawers. And then I became familiar with their baskets. And then through the Shaker Museum, I learned that, they were pretty fringy and doily. So.
And when did you first connect with the museum? What was that started the whole this sort of upcoming show that you're working on with them?
I think was it 2 months ago or 3 months ago?
I don't know. Time has lost all meaning.
It truly has. I think it was early October. So
that's right. Yeah.
That's a month and a half ago.
That's very recently. Yeah.
Susan Ainsworth called and asked if I wanted to do a show, and it's curate a pop-up and maybe put one of my pieces in the show. And I was like, yes, definitely. So that was when I was introduced to Lacy. And then I went up 2 weeks after in mid-October and got a tour of the collection. And it was really amazing and also quite surprising, which I'll get into later.
How many pieces are in the collection, Lacy?
It's if you really count every single little piece of paper in the archives, as well as every tool and every little bit of everything, it's around 18,000 objects.
Wow. And Katie, what attracted you to doing this sort of pop-up exhibition with the Shakers? I think if someone just knows your work and your more popular work, the lady lamps and the nips and all that stuff, they might be where is this coming from? Why? These are the most two unexpected. This is a very unexpected pairing. What attracted you to doing this? You obviously said yes very quickly, and so I'm sort of curious, what was your point of inspiration? What made you latch on to the idea?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about what I thought at least was the Shaker mentality and sort of aesthetic recently, because I know people are super familiar. I feel like the lady lamps are my sort of like the go-to thing that I design, and that's what people mostly know me for. But I've been working a lot in wicker recently, and not like a lot, but like a few larger projects, but they've just been like taking a long time. And I was looking at, like American basketry, which like brought me back to Shakers, and just like how they sort of like, just how they wove baskets. And then in this one specific cabinet I made, there were like these wooden pieces, and I just was like looking at the cabinets and the forms, and how simple they are, and how they introduce like elements of ornament in like kind of subtle ways that I was interested in experimenting with, because I tend to be like more overt with my expressions. So that's sort of where I kind of like started exploring Shaker furniture again.
And Lacy, obviously, can you put the Shakers into a little bit of a historical context in terms of, that they're starting in the 18th century? Today we think of them as American, but, at the time it was very radical. And were their designs radical for the time in terms of American furniture and decorative arts as well? Or how do you think that they were perceived at the time? Of course, today they look American as apple pie, but back then I'm sure it was something very different.
Yeah, I think, the Shakers came over from Manchester, England in the late 18th century. And they were a Christian religious sect. They were founded by a woman. And they came over from England, and they settled near Albany, New York, and sort of ended up proliferating from there into New England and down south into Kentucky and west as far as Ohio. And they created these planned communities where they lived together, and they worship together. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the furniture is that they considered all of their labor to be part of their worship. So whether they were actually, in the meeting house, singing and dancing and worshiping in ways that are familiar to us, they also considered their work in the fields or their work in the workshops making chairs. They considered that part of worshiping as well, which I think is kind of a great way to think about all of the work that we do. And there's some ways that particularly the chairs and some of the furniture just kind of look like early American basic kind of farm furniture, but they did evolve this very beautiful spare aesthetic with a lot of the things that they made that I think was actually quite radical, just like their beliefs were very radical. And there's there's evidence that in the early 20th century that some of the people who became fundamental to the Scandinavian modern furniture design movement saw a Shaker chair and thought, whoa, what is this? And really found it to be a very, very radical piece of furniture.
And Katie, do you consider your work to be, is it part of your worship? Like, is it part of your, do you gain like a sort of spiritual value to yourself through your work? Like, you think that it's important for your own immortal soul to kind of like develop these pieces and, rather than just like something that you do?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd say definitely. It's like hard for me to decipher like whether it's like this like compulsion or like an obsession or, something that I like really I do find like a lot of meaning in it, and I really like working with my hands, and it's sort of how I think. Like I feel much more confident with my hands than, for instance, like having a conversation a lot of the time. And it's how it's definitely, it's like how I cope. It's how I like react to the world. it also like keeps me grounded. I didn't have a studio for about a month, and I was like so comically depressed. And I realized it's because I didn't have a space to make work. So I can relate to that. Definitely.
And how do you relate to the sort of that early kind of, as Lacy was saying, the Shakers were, founded by a woman. There's a lot of, you know, connections and sort of femininity in your work and their work, and how it all, like, what do you identify with the most in terms of that kind of connection?
Well, what I thought, I didn't fully realize like how feminist the Shakers were until Lacy basically told me, until I visited the museum. Like I knew that they were celibate, but I didn't realize, I just like didn't make the connection between, not having children and being able to like have time to do other things aside from rearing children. And yeah, I so much admire the fact that women were treated equally. And there are these like amazing photos of one of the sisters like working on a lathe in the wood shop. I can't remember, from the 30s. And I love that. Like, I love that the women were like working, they were entrepreneurial. They were like business people and crafts people, and I think it's great.
And do you see what kind of commentary are you trying to make with your own work recently in terms of like the lady lamps and everything else? Like, do you see your work as commentary on sort of feminism or the role of women in design?
Yeah, I mean, the lady lamps, they started out as like a commentary on the objectification of women by like literally turning them into household objects. And I like wanted to make them like feel a little free and like a little lumpy and expressive, and also kind of like if you turn away, they're just gonna like drop the lampshade and walk away. And then the women, it's evolved, and now the women.
That's a little terrifying.
Now the women like hold other women, and sometimes the women turn into like animals, and like boundaries are just really dissolving. So.
And you're also producing a chair or two chairs, as I hear, for the pop-up. Can you explain a little bit about? They're very different than I think what I've seen of your work before. Like, can you explain them?
Okay, I was originally inspired by the bonnets, and so I wanted to make bonnets for chairs. And then after going to the museum and like rifling around the collection, I was just so inspired by like the various ways that the things were made. Like there's this rag, and Lacy like pulled the rag aside, and we could like see that it was just like made in a way that I wasn't totally expecting. It was like really simple. And then I was like sort of just like taking notes on like all of the ways that things were woven together, or stitched or like pleated. And so I made these two chairs that were inspired by like various ways that the Shakers made things aside from chairs. And they sort of just like took on a life of their own. So one of the chairs is made out of this reflective fabric, like safety reflective fabric. And that was inspired by the taffeta, that's the word, right? The like 2-colored silk. Mm-hmm. That they've used a lot in their clothing or in like little pin cushions. And like the form is like very simple, kind of like a Shaker chair. And then there are like little scraps woven into it. And then the other chair is just sort of like a full bonnet bonanza. And
asymmetrical as well, correct?
Asymmetrical, yeah.
Many of your pieces are.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Or there's like an element of asymmetry in them. Yeah, she's just like full bonnet with like lots of, I don't know how else to explain her.
Okay.
But one of the other things I was super inspired by, and I really know nothing about it, so Lacy, maybe you could tell us, but the Shaker spirit writing. Because I feel like it reminded me a lot of surrealism and like their automatic practices where they would just be like eyes to hand, like no brain. And they would just like express themselves. So I was like trying to do with these chairs, I like tried to like get into this like trance where I was like, I can't overthink it. I just have to do it and like let the chair, like let elements just like be how they are. But that was sort of like my interpretation of spirit writing. And I was.
Yeah, Lacy, can you explain that? Like what is the, I've never heard about this. What is the sort of Shaker spirit writing?
Yeah, the Shaker spirit writing is one of those elements that I kind of chalk up under the category of Shakers, weirder than you thought. Around about the 1830s, the Shakers went through this era of very, very intense spiritualism. And sometimes it's called the era of manifestation. Sometimes it's called the era of mother's work. Mother being Mother Ann Lee, who was the founder of the Shakers. She died in the late 1700s. So by the 1830s, there were a lot of Shakers who hadn't met her in person. Sort of the people who had known her personally were beginning to die off, and there was a new generation of Shakers who, really revered Mother Ann, but hadn't known her in real life. And for some reason, during this period, and it lasted, 10 or more years, Shakers across all of the different communities started to have these communications from the spirit world, and they would manifest in a lot of different ways. They could manifest in this kind of automatic writing that Katie's referring to, but they also manifested in these drawings, which are these extremely intricate, very outsider art, obsessive compulsive sorts of things that are very, very beautiful and very uncanny.
Have many survived?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them out in the world. We have some in our collection. There's many of them are at Hancock Shaker Village. Some of them are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There's a lot in private collections, and there's been books written about them as well. But sometimes also and I liked hearing Katie talk about feeling like she was channeling something in the making of these chairs, because sometimes these so-called spirit gifts would come in the form of a new dance or a new song or a laughing fit. And it wasn't just Mother Ann, it was other departed Shaker leaders. It was political leaders like Thomas Jefferson. They would often get these spirit communications also from Native Americans, which I think is a pretty interesting thing to have happening at that particular moment in American history. And it's very fascinating and very strange.
Katie, is there, of all the pieces that you've pulled out from the Shaker Museum's collection for this pop-up, let's review some of the highlights that you really identify with. What would be your first?
Well, I think a good jumping off point would be Mother Ann's name written in spirit writing.
What do you love about it?
Well, if you refer to the stoneware jug, it sort of reminds me of the pattern on the jug, and it's basically Mother Ann's name written as this like ornamental pattern, and it is so beautiful. And as Lacy was saying, it's like uncanny, and it's just something you can like stare at forever. It's just like a maze of little tendrils.
Yeah, I would say that's something that kind of pattern or the sort of the ornament is not something I would normally associate with shaker, maybe because that's just not what gets shared. It's not furniture. It's more of a small decorative object.
Exactly.
It's also, it's worth noting that that it's illegible.
You can't.
You wouldn't look at it and you could never, there's no way that you would ever decipher that it says Mother Ann Lee. It's in a it's in some kind of spirit language that
Yeah,
the
it looks
rest
like a tattoo.
us.
It looks like a very like a hipster's really cool tattoo that they would have on the back somewhere, which is actually I'm just waiting for someone to get that Mother Ann tattoo, Katie.
It would be really good.
That would be really good. Let's move on to the. I love the sort of pair of shoes that would be worn at a meeting. Lacy, can you explain this little low-heeled footwear?
Yes. Who knew that the Shakers were the popularizers of the kitten heel? But I think, as I mentioned before, dancing and song were important parts of their formal worship service, and they would almost put on a sort of uniform in order to worship like that. And that color, that blue color, was their deeply holy color. So the men would have vests in that color, and the shoes were that color. And they're absolutely gorgeous things with hand stitched soles, and they're very, very beautiful. But also, this is common in shoes of this era, there's no technical left or right shoe, which seems like it might have been really uncomfortable for dancing. But
and Katie, what did you love about the knit squirrel pot holder, which I think is probably the most Katie Stout of all of the things that we have here, and it is also quite adorable.
So I guess when I was going through the collection, I was like so surprised to find all these little stuffed animals. And I thought they were like entirely delightful. Lacy, tell me if I'm wrong, but Lacy said that they were mostly made for sale. It's not totally something, I don't know, I don't think it was like something that
kind of like, it sounds like shaker export or.
Yeah, exactly. It was shaker export. And I thought that was also really interesting because I knew very little about their like entrepreneurial like genius. Like they were the first ones to package seeds. Is that true? And sell them. And I just thought the squirrel sort of encapsulates like the perfect counterpoint to how everyone sees the Shakers. So I thought it was really important to include. And as I was looking through all of the things that I picked, I think everything that was sort of like the mindset behind all of the selections. Just objects that we don't totally associate with Shaker design. Because I think like at least I have, my introduction to Shaker design has definitely been through this like modernist lens of like clean lines and purity and sort of like austerity.
Well, speaking of austerity, the bed warmer I thought was really kind of appealed to the modernist in me. Lacy, what can you tell us about that piece?
I don't know much about that piece, and I have to say I had actually never laid eyes on it until Katie picked it.
Well, there you go.
Which is one of the fun things about having new people, seeing the collection through other people's eyes, is that you either get a new perspective on something or you see something you never even saw in the collection before.
Talk a little bit about pieces like the patched blue vessel and this sort of new wave of work of yours that's come after the Lady Lamp, but that is more about kind of, I don't know, maybe disassembling archetypes of furniture.
Yeah, I think the large blue patch vessel is Yeah, I was just thinking about like using all of these things that I had in my studio, and it's sort of just this like conglomeration of all of these different ceramic methods and materials. And I was thinking about it more like less as ceramic and more as like quilting pieces together.
It's kind of like a frugality in a way, I guess, like a sort of little shaker frugality. Like if you're looking at taking the patch vessel in blue, and then if you sort of look at it next to the box covered with broom labels from the Shaker Museum, you can kind of see this like patchwork sort of genius come through, I guess, or frugality of conservation of materials. What can you tell me about the box?
But I just loved how simple this was and how it's like clearly made out of some sort of label. It's their broom labels. And this sort of like, I don't know, like the Shakers sort of, they celebrated everything. Like this was like made out of, it's a super simple design. It's like made out of scrap material, but they like put a little pattern on it, and it's like very celebrated. So I thought that was really amazing. And it's an example of their frugality. And yeah, sort of like, I don't know, I think it's like a little bit of like genius. And also I like that it's broom labels because it's also an example of how like business oriented they were.
And Lacy, like of all of the pieces that are of Katie's that are going to be in the show, I guess aside from the new chairs, which one do you think, if we could resurrect someone from the 18th century and the Shaker movement to come to see the pop-up show, like what do you think that they would be sort of the most, drawn to, or what do you think that they would have the most to say about?
Well, there will be two pieces.
Or they just burn Katie at the stake, and then that would be it.
Oh no, the Shakers would have loved Katie. I think there's two of Katie's chairs will be in the show. Those are the pieces that the contemporary pieces that are there. It's a small space. I think it would be. I think that the Shakers, their aesthetic really got hijacked a little bit by the early collectors who had a vested interest in selling that furniture that they bought from the Shakers when the Shaker communities were in decline. They wanted to present it as very stark and modernist, and that was the way that was the story they told in order to sell a commodity, basically. But I think one of the things that Katie has revealed here through this show is that there's just way more to the story. I mean, you see photographs of the spaces they actually lived in. They were much more cluttered than you would have been led to believe by the sort of outside people who took over that narrative. And I think they would have loved. I think they would have loved the bonnet chairs. I think they would have recognized it, and they would have thought it was very, very cool. They loved new things. They weren't like the Amish or some other religious sects that don't like change. They were always on top of new technologies. They would take new inventions and they would improve them. They would patent things. They were always looking out for what were the newest ways to farm and to keep livestock and things like that. I think they would have been very into it. I often joke that if the Shakers were around today in the sort of, there is a Shaker community that exists in Maine now, but if they were as widespread as they were in the middle of the 19th century, they'd probably be doing things like mining cryptocurrency.
That's a very good point. Katie, I'm going to give you the last word here. What would you say is sort of like the one thing you would like a visitor to the pop-up show know, or like what would you want their takeaway to be in terms of understanding your work and who you are?
And okay, I guess Wow, I was like so ready for you to ask about like what the takeaway would be about the shakers, not my work.
All right, well, let's talk about your work first, and then we'll go to the shakers. Or let's talk about the shakers first, and then you can switch back.
Well, I guess in terms of a takeaway about my work, like I made these two chairs that are very much a reaction to shakers. And I'm not sure anyone would be able to understand like the full context of those two chairs about if they didn't know anything else, but maybe that's the whole point, and that's sort of the point of the show. It's like we've only really seen, or a lot of us have only been exposed to this like one perspective on shaker furniture and design, which has been like super modernist and almost like patriarchal in a way, and like a little cold. And the whole notion of purity just is like so freaky to me. I hate it. And a lot of people, pure is a word that's like been used to describe shaker furniture like over and over. And so I guess I'd want the takeaway to be like there's always like another side to something, and that shaker furniture and shakers they're like so much more than, you know, the shaker chairs that we see. They were really freaky and cool. There's like, I also don't think like they lived. Yeah, I don't know. I was just also like super fascinated by how covered all of the furniture was that they used in like doilies and tchotchkes. But I digress. I guess the takeaway would be like knowing that there are multiple perspectives on things.
And about your own work, is that how you want people to sort of view your lady lamps and fruit lady and the floor lamps? Is that it's more three-dimensional than maybe what it might appear to be at first glance?
Exactly, yeah, because it's sort of like what you said at the beginning. Like it seems like a surprising fit, like my work with shaker work. But I think it like totally makes sense if you just do like a little deep dive. But yeah, that's the takeaway, I guess. And with these chairs, also, I was thinking about, I was just looking at them together, and I was thinking about the shoes and the dancing that we talked about at first. And I think the chairs in this funny way, they look, it sort of looks like, they look like partners, like one's like maybe a male and one's a female, but you can't quite tell like which is which, or like if they really are gendered. And they sort of look like they're about to like do a little dance together, which I like. And I don't know, to me that speaks to the shaker community, sort of this like I don't know, their progressive ideas on gender and how like celebratory they were.
Amazing. Is there anything that you guys wanted to mention or talk about before we wrap up?
So the pop-up exhibition will be open in Chatham, New York, and it's Friday through Sunday on Main Street in a little storefront. And Chatham, New York is going to be the new home of the new Shaker Museum. We're in the process of building a new facility in downtown Chatham. We're working with the architect Annabelle Seldorf on that. And we're excited to have a presence in the village of Chatham in advance of having our permanent year-round home there in a few years.
Amazing. Another reason to go up to Chatham. Katie, anything on your end?
I mean, I can't really think of anything specific. I feel like I was just so inspired by everything I saw, and I could listen to Lacy talk about it forever.
No, I think I'm gonna have to go buy a book on the Shakers right after this, and start to do more reading, because I do want to learn more about, you know how they were maybe the cryptocurrency kings of the 18th century. Is really like kind of a fascinating way of thinking about them in a totally non in a totally new way that is, like you, as you said, like not just pre-modernists, and the sort of the story ends there. So thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Thank
You.
everyone, to Design Miami, and to the Shaker Museum, and to Katie, and to R and Company, and thank you for asking me to be here and to speak with you guys.